Back to Brian's Beat.
To a Brian's Beat. I'm Brian. What a great day to be outside or just working in the garden. Whatever the case may be, today is a good day to soak in that vitamin D. Hour 2 of the program. Waiting in the wings, a member of the New Bedford School Committee, Ross Grace Jr. But before we go to him, Monthly Fee RX brings us the Brian's Beat quote of the day. If you're spending less than $20 a month for prescription drugs, great. If not, then our Monthly Fee RX service might be a good option for you. Check for yourself at monthlyfeerx.com. The quote of the day. I believe in the brotherhood of all men, but I don't believe in wasting brotherhood on anyone who doesn't want to practice it with me. Brotherhood is a two-way street. Do you know who said that quote? Any idea? 508-996-0500. We talked yesterday for a good, strong hour, and there were quite a few people left over after the conversation dealing with segregation in New Bedford schools. And so I reached out to somebody on the New Bedford School Committee because, heck, if we're talking about schools, we're talking about segregation, I'm sure there's at least one school committee member who may have interest. Ross Grace Jr., he's been on the program before. He joins us again this morning. Ross, good morning. Welcome back, man.
Good morning, Brian. Thanks for having me on. I really
no problem at all.
Good morning.
Yeah, it is early, but you know what?
Yeah.
Sometimes I like it when it's early like this because then I've got the rest of the day to go out and I can do the beach or whatever the case may be.
Brian, morning is the best time of the day. That's when the sun is getting up, you know, where our minds should be active. You get on exercise, and then you leave the rest of the day to do things that you enjoy doing. Except morning's always been the best part of the day. You know, that's when our mind's on the move, you know. We get the day moving and motivated in the morning.
Get the day moving, get motivated, get your work done, and then you can have fun.
Then you can have fun.
There you go.
Yeah, but now we're on the same page with that, Brian. I've always been an early guy.
You want to take a stab at the quote of the day?
I thought it was very profound, and it made a lot of sense. It was the very first time I heard of it, Brian, and I've heard a lot of really, really powerful quotes, especially when it comes to that topic. But I don't know who said that one. But it really is right. I mean, in terms of respect and in terms of how we treat one another and expectation of one another. I mean, it really is a two-way street. You know, we want to have a certain code where we all do the right thing and live a certain way. But at the same time, we have to be mindful of people who aren't reciprocating that. You know, we don't want to turn into a fool either because we're trying to do right.
I think you hit it right. And not knowing the person personally, but knowing the family, I can say that he would agree with what you just stated. All right, so you've had a chance to read Colin Hogan's article from New Bedford Light Segregation in New Bedford.
I did. Yep, and I also read the superintendent's, I read his article. And you know what, Brian, when I first read it, I was kind of taken off guard in the sense of the disparities. You know what I'm saying?
How so?
And when you see the numbers right in front of you, you know what I'm saying? And I'll pull up the article right now. When you pull up the numbers right in front of you, and you're seeing 50% of the schools completely non-English, 4% English, not English, 53% is English, not English. You see the numbers and they kind of stick out. And so, you know my background, Brian, you know what I'm saying? Before I got into education, I was into social justice, I was in inequity. And so it was important that I took note of it. But then I thought about the word segregation, and I thought about the context in which it's being used by RIAC as opposed to a deliberate policy that came from Jim Crow in particular that was designed to keep people in certain economic situations, that was keeping people from access to education, that was keeping people from being competitive in the job market. When segregation was established after slavery, after Reconstruction, it was done with the intent of keeping the African American population marginalized. And once the Emancipation Proclamation was signed and African Americans, developed some sort of independence and the possibility to move forward, there were systems politically put in place and violently enforced to make sure a certain social order was maintained. Now, we look at our numbers up here. I went to Connie Academy as a student. At that time, it was predominantly black. If you've gone to the Cape Gome School, predominantly Cape Verde, and you go to certain schools, there were certain nationalities that were predominant in that community. And a lot of it because of immigration. When people come over, they come over together, and they have a tendency to settle down together and support one another. And of course, we're seeing the best.
So just to encapsulate, when people come over and they're living together, it's a familiarity. It's a brotherhood, sisterhood.
It really, really is. And a lot of times they support one another, and they also face common hardships in that community. Economics. Okay, so we have a large Mayan and Guatemalan population coming over right now, the Quiche speaking population. And they come over together under completely different circumstances than what average, I wouldn't say portraits with, than what a lot of people would consider. They come over under extreme circumstances, so they hang out together. And, of course, that has an impact on the schools. That's going to have an impact on attendance. That's going to have an impact on the scores. And again, when you look at it, they don't go, because they're in a certain community, they'd be predominant within certain schools. So now that school is going to reflect the economic conditions, the historical background and the cultural background that they've come from, the adversities. The school's numbers are going to reflect their experiences. But it's concerning because we always have to do better. You know what I'm saying? We always have to do better. And that's why Colin's article is important, because it made us sit down and think we're having a conversation about it.
Well, yes, it did, but it made me think, and I didn't quite hear you finish the thought that I was actually thinking, which I don't mean to put words into your mouth, but the segregation of the 1950s that was supposed to be eliminated through Brown versus Board of Education is wholly different than the segregation that Colin Hogan is talking about in his article. And I think what I see here is another way for governments to expand their foothold in the door by saying, now all of a sudden we've got these populations that, they may not have a lot of money, but they've got a language barrier. So now we can add that you have to turn around and add more teachers in order to teach to these students. And of course, the system gets bigger because it gets more money. And then, of course, you get people like Mr. O'Leary, who is correct. You don't have enough money, but all of a sudden you need more money. And the poor taxpayer of New Bedford is turning around and saying, well, wait a minute. I'm not not putting anybody into the school, and I'm paying more and more money. I can't afford to stay here anymore.
And it goes back to the larger systemic problem. The word segregation, and again, that's why it made my it piqued my curiosity, Brian. The way it's used by RIAC and the way that it was when it was implemented, particularly in the South, and again, through policy, direct policy, is very, very different than we're dealing here. And so now when you use strong language like that, you can make a case for other agendas. You understand what I'm saying? And I think that's the case. I think what's more important, as opposed to like using words like segregation, is identifying, and I think we have an outstanding superintendent, by the way. I've said this very publicly and very clearly. He's all, the language he uses is always about equitable. You know what I'm saying? He's constantly having conversations about making sure our policies and our discussions are translated in a variety of languages. You know what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying, but I don't know how you can do it. I don't know that you can really be equitable. In order to be equitable in New Bedford or in Dartmouth or any other city, town, not only here in the Commonwealth, but across the nation, is you're going to have to pound down on those supposedly doing better in order to lift up the ones from the bottom. Yeah. I think the system is busted.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and then, Brian, that'll go into the other conversation. I mean, you already know my belief system when it comes to MCAS. If you're talking about segregation, or if you're talking about having policies that marginalize or get the least bang for the buck of certain communities, then you have to look at the high-stakes state mandated testing. You know what I'm saying? Because if there's anything that kind of limits opportunity, it's policies like that. And I would say those have more racial and socio-political implications than using the word segregation to describe almost, not to say the natural dynamics, except how the school makeup is really reflective of the community and the diverse group of people that that New Bedford is blessed to have. You know, so I think the word segregation.
I think you're absolutely correct. I'm going to say it like this. It sounds to me, and I'm not taking this out on Colin Hogan. He is putting together the story. But I think that there is an agenda. I mean, for one thing, we're talking about the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. We're not talking about the 75th. You know, how many people really celebrate the 70th anniversary? Couples, 70 years old if you turn 70, but 70 isn't something that you turn around and look at the country and say, 70 years since Brown versus Board of Education, 50 years, 75 years, 100 years, 70 years. I think that there's not even a hidden agenda, but there is an agenda.
Yeah, Brian, and there always is, and that's the problem. I've always been, and you and I have discussed this before, and maybe this is getting a little bit off time. That's why I believe that the schools should have more autonomy, districts have more autonomy, because when it's coming from, in particular, that's from the state, that's where this riot thing is coming from, you just have to wonder, what's the motivating factor behind it. And, like I said, there's clearly an agenda, they're labeling things as opposed to having a conversation about how do we make sure, they're not talking about making sure that the kids are getting more, you know what I'm saying? They're talking about, they're using language that just highlights a problem that they're not addressing. And if anything, they're amplifying.
They want a discussion. But what happens with that discussion? So you've seen this. You are a member of the New Bedford School Committee. I did see Chris Carter yesterday. He was working, and we had a brief discussion about it. What do you take to the Mayor Reed, chief of the school committee? What do you take to Superintendent O'Leary, back to him and say, if you're going to go anywhere with this, this is what you need to implement?
I don't, just because we had a well-written, thoughtful article, doesn't mean that we have to kind of stray off course. I think we're heading in the right direction. I think that the real deal is constantly getting teachers of diverse socioeconomic backgrounds into our buildings. I think we have to make sure our curriculums are flexible, where students can learn more about each other, and there's time for students of different socioeconomic backgrounds to interact with each other. I think that's the most important thing. I think it's all about the practices within the buildings and within the system of how to make it more cohesive so that children, again, a more global, well-rounded education. I see that as responsibilities of the school. And because when you're talking about segregation, it goes just beyond the school building. This is where VIACS kind of really, really missing the ball on it. They're making it look, the language they use makes it look like that the school has a system in place that kind of keeps all cultural backgrounds or all racial backgrounds in an area that allows them to be underperforming. And that's the way the language comes across. The conversation should be shifted as to how do we keep segregation out of learning? How do we make sure that we're still building bridges and having conversations about culture and differences in a respectable way? How do we make sure that our children are being exposed to different things? You know, we're not going to change. I mean, if there was another ethnic group who came over to New Bedford for one reason or another, chances are they're going to congregate in one certain area, and that the school's going to reflect that, and the needs are going to have to be met for that community. You know, and you're going to have to make sure that teaching and instruction is delivered that meets the needs of that community.
So let me ask you. You bring up an excellent point.
Yeah.
You're saying when a new group comes in, you have to meet the needs of that community. Now, what happens if the needs of that community are 180 degrees different than another group within that school or within that district, or maybe all of the students? What do you do then? Because I come from the camp. You may say that we have to educate everybody, but the fact of the matter is you cannot educate everybody very well.
Now, here's the thing, right? You take, for an example, right, the Mayan or Guatemalan community. A lot of them are leaving hardships people don't even understand, and we have the nerve to talk about these immigrant people. Like, we use these awful language for people who come in some conditions that we couldn't even fathom. So they come over here and they have very little to nothing because they're escaping, lifestyles that we couldn't imagine. And their priority isn't going to be going to school. It's about putting money on the table, and that's why they start working. So, reinforce what you're saying, the schools have as much, we have to do everything we can, except we have to also be realistic about what's going on in society. So when you have a community like that, my opinion is, and this is where it does fall on the shoulders of the schools, is having the right leadership in place that can identify the common threads of all the students. What are the expectations? What are the standards? And then having a well-versed, diverse staff that's able to at least bring them up in terms of academic standards, but at the same time developing a school culture that embraces everybody there. That's how schools perform really well, when all the students feel invested and connected, and then you have high standards. So that's the way I would approach a school like that. But I think that's where the conversation needs to be, not talking about why a New Bedford school segregated, because I really don't think that's the case. Segregation was a deliberate policy, and if anything, we still have school choice, which I think is a questionable policy. Except so if a child is feeling, all right, this school is one way or another because of its racial or socioeconomic makeup, I can go somewhere else. That wasn't allowed under Jim Crow and segregation.
Yeah.
So my belief is the conversation, and I think Mr. O'Leary does an outstanding job of making sure that what's going on in the building is meeting the needs of the students in the building.
I come back. You cannot meet the needs of everybody and do it well. Right. Just take one school, never mind the whole school district. And I say this because you can be well-intentioned, but you've already made the point, and the story also makes the point that you don't have enough teachers. You don't have enough teachers of color. And now all of a sudden, and I can hear somebody rightfully stating, oh, now you got to go out and get teachers of color, so you're going to hire somebody that's a teacher of color over somebody else that might be more qualified that isn't a teacher of color. There's always going to be, a tug of war going on. Yeah.
Brian, I worked in the public schools for 17 years, and I got to a point, because you're saying things there are things that are just overwhelming in terms of where's the solution. You know what I'm saying? I remember when I left the schools, I would tell the teachers, it's like going in your mother's old junk drawer and having a whole bunch, you're looking for threads, and you have like 5 and it's all knotted out, and you're trying to untangle and trying to figure out where to begin. The problems in the schools are overwhelming. And I think there's so much conversation about schools being a transformational force of society, and it's a major, major piece. But there are things that are going on that transcend what the schools can do, as you said, in a really effective way, because there are so many different conditions that impact the public schools, from policies, which a lot of them make no sense, to the values in our community, to the way children learn nowadays, to family interaction. There are so many pieces that make a meaningful education more challenging. Lack of teachers, and not just lack of teachers, but lack of people in the workforce, period, you know what I'm saying, or at least in that particular field. There are overwhelming issues. And that's why when it comes to the schools, I'm like, I take the heat off in terms of like all the testing and get just back down to basics. Make sure the kids are learning creatively, that they have a sense of confidence, a sense of self-esteem, the belief that they can learn. You know, I think there's so much pressure and there's so many systems in place that don't make any sense. It makes it convoluted, and it's chasing good teachers away.
I think it's chasing teachers away, and it's chasing families and students out of the system, not necessarily to leave New Bedford to go to Dartmouth or Fairhaven, but the homeschooling, the online schooling, they need a break because these kids are breaking down.
Yeah, the school system has become so convoluted. It was so much more simple even when I was there. And as a student who went to the public schools, who became a school adjustment counselor, and then an administrator, it became more and more complex. And less and less of it was student-centered. So I don't have the answer, Brian. You and I talk about
I don't think anybody has any. I have my answer, but nobody's going to go down the road of saying you got to just scrap the system and make it an all, pay as you play type system. Nobody's going to do that, but that would be the best thing to do. I don't hear these kind of complaints coming out of private schools. I don't hear these kind of complaints coming out of home schools.
See, now if you want to talk about segregation and to an extent discrimination, I mean, that's where you really start seeing it, because you have these private schools that have they're not beholden to the state in any way, shape, form, or fashion, yet our public schools are. That's the real conversation, as opposed to looking at the public schools and putting strong language upon them. Let's look at the disparities between the accountability of the private schools as opposed to the ones that our public school students are in. You know what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying. I'm going to do this. I'm going to ask you a question. When you go out of town, do you take a taxi or do you take an Uber?
Uber.
Why do you do Uber?
Honestly, only because it's more convenient, Brian. I'm being very direct. I live on my cell phone, and I'm able to just press a couple buttons as opposed to making a phone call.
And that is a great answer. And that to the point, they don't have the red tape that the taxi companies have, and your rates are going to be much better. It's the same thing with the school system. If you're telling me that the system is paying anywhere from $15,000 to $20,000 per student, that rivals what a student pays to go to a private school.
Yeah, Brian, and that's a really, really good point. Sometimes you say things that I'm not even as aware of.
I'm a genius.
Exactly right about that. You really are, Brian.
No,
I'm glad to see it.
No, but I'm saying.
I'm not Saturday morning off with you. I can always learn something.
Don't worry about that, Ross. I find that every Saturday morning I start with Me Too.
That's the best way to start the day, Brian. With Brian Thomas.
But seriously, getting back to this, I think you hit it on the head. Segregation is not the correct word, or segregation is now being expanded to include other things that segregation did not include. And if I'm not a white person, but I used to be married to one. I have two children that are mixed race. One is getting ready to marry a white person. The other one is heavily entrenched with a Haitian American now. Yeah. So, I see both sides of that particular coin that only has two sides. What I'm trying to really say here is that I could understand that a Caucasian person reading this story and they're looking and they're thinking, I went to school in New Bedford.
Yeah.
I don't remember segregation. This was after 1970. What
Yeah.
are they talking about? And then
Yeah,
what are they trying to fix here?
Yeah, that's why I thought the language was very, I just think there's, because if you look at the word technically, segregation is, it's just kind of like separating according to some type of base, categorizing almost, you know what I'm saying? It's to segregate. But it's not a deliberate or intentional policy, especially in New Bedford, Massachusetts public schools, with the intent of keeping people disenfranchised. The language is very misleading, but I've seen that in the past, you know what I'm saying? And again, I don't know if it's, from Colin's point of view, because I respect Colin tremendously, and I think it's important that these articles are written so that we have these dialogues. But that word came from the advisory council, the RIAC council, and I think that's where we have to, in terms of what is the agenda here. And again, it's important to highlight where there are discrepancies, and it is important to highlight where the schools are coming up short so we can improve upon them. I don't think any of us disagree with that. But
I didn't see that. I didn't see that from the superintendent. Yeah. He was. I was almost like he was being fed candy. The way he responded. Yeah, I would like somebody to just get up there and say, where is the segregation? It's one thing to say that you may have some low-income people or people that speak English as a second or third or fifth language. All right, that's not segregation. Yeah. That's English as a you're an English language learner.
Yeah, that's very, very misleading terminology. And as you said, for the person, because even when I first read it, and it took me a second to pull myself back, because the way RIAC frames it almost looks like there's a deliberate ostracizing of resources or a deliberate attempt to make sure that certain schools in public schools are getting more than others, and it completely failed to take into consideration the populations that those schools serve and the unique challenges that and opportunities that schools have because of their particular makeup. You know what I'm saying? There's always opportunity too when we have diverse or different backgrounds all throughout the city. And you want a school that celebrates that and welcomes that, and then brings, this is what America's supposed to be all about.
How about this?
Learn how to get along with each other and interacting with each other.
How about this? Are the students at Gomes, at Kearney, at Duval's, are Winslow, you name your elementary, you name your middle, you name your high school, are they complaining? I mean, there are a lot of things that they can complain about. No. Please don't get me wrong. But are they complaining about integration, segregation, part of the story here?
And Brian, I go to this all the time. I say this all the time. There's always this big to-do from people who are very supportive of me to people who I strongly disagree with. There's always so much in terms of what I call the ideologues, the paper pushers, the people who read the numbers and the big stuff. My thing is always where the rubber hits the road. Now, when you're talking about what's going on in school buildings, the students don't have, you have your, especially in the high school, you have your organizations that advocate for different political, I know there's a black student coalition or something like that. Out there was minority action committee. It used to be like the Portuguese Club. You have those diverse groups, and you should. You know what I'm saying? I think that's a positive thing. I was part of all that stuff. But at the same time, you don't hear just regular conversation about the school is you will be in completely not getting the same amount of resources because everybody hears from, that's not the conversation. And again, we do need to keep our fingers on the pulse of things. We have to monitor. We have to make sure that if we do have teachers or, who aren't understanding of culture, we have to address that. And we have to make sure that what's being taught in our buildings reflects the common values of an American society, you know what I'm saying, a melting pot. Those are values we should be having in our schools, and we should be making sure that that the different cultures and the different rich groups of people that we have here are all reflected in the instruction and just events, the things that were gutted out.
So,
under leadership. Those things are all important.
I want you to hold that thought. I've got a caller who wants to get in here, and I want to. A couple of things that you brought up that I definitely want to get to, but I've been letting this guy hold on for quite some time. Hello, you're on with Ross Grace Jr. Hello.
Yeah, good morning, Brian. Good morning, Ross. You know, here in the city of New Bedford, 60% of our budget is going towards public schools. Just to give you an idea, our budget is going to be $500 million. Our public school budget is going to be $300 million. This is the public school mega complex. It's a failing model. We need to give it parents' choice because the working poor and the working class by the Democrats, and the Democrats in bed with social justice, the Dixiecrats were the ones that segregation and Jim Crow, and the Democrats run the public schools here to keep the working poor dumbed down. We need parents to have a choice to put their schools in where they feel they're going to excel. Reading and writing proficiency here in the city of New Bedford is horrible. And we keep throwing money into a failing model. Do you know that the United States, out of all the industrialized nations, pays the most, and we're ranked 25th in education?
All right,
what you're saying is throw more money at the failing model.
Let Ross try to answer your question. Go ahead, Ross.
Yeah. Well, hey, first of all, thank you for listening and getting on. I mean, like I said, it's important that we're all talking about this stuff together. Historically, and I don't want to get too political with it, the Democrats of the South, which eventually evolved into the Republican, the GOP, it had evolved. But you're correct in that. Back in those days, in the 1800s, the segregation, Jim Crow, that was run by Democrats. Now, political party values change and evolve. But the most important thing you're talking about is the parent investment, and I go back to it all the time. Even when we ran the campaign, I don't believe in as much, and I do think there's a role in some state support here and there, you know what I'm saying, but I don't believe in terms of the public schools. I believe in more autonomy. I believe that leadership, families, students together should have common values that shape the way that school works. I think we're missing that right now because everything is so.
But everybody, how do you try to get common value? Actually, I got to take a break. I want you to finish. We have other callers who want to get in. Ross Grace Jr. is our guest. 508-996-0500 to get on to Brian's Beat. Ross Grace Jr., New Bedford School Committee, is our guest. I'm going to bring him up right now. Ross, we got a couple of callers that want to get in here, so I'm real quick on your answer with this. If, as the story in New Bedford Light states, that there seems to be a lack of teachers of color in for many of these students, how are you going to get them and how do you retain them? Real quick.
All right, so real quick, the thing again, this goes back to the larger workforce. We're seeing less people get into public education, period. And because you have people of color who are just less numbers as a whole, you're naturally going to have a less number. I go all the time. Old school approach. I was literally tracked down by the superintendent of public schools. He followed me when I graduated from high school. It's important that the schools have pipeways and segues to follow their students and invest in them and then bring them back. That's literally how I got into the public school. The superintendent followed me from when I graduated from high school through grad school. I was working at UMass Dartmouth, and he called me up. And I was there for 17 years after that. Those are those little things that make a difference.
All right. Hold that. Let's get on to a couple of callers here. 508-996-0500. You're on with Ross Grace Jr.
Hi. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Brian.
And Ross, good morning.
Hey, good morning. How are you?
Okay, fine. How you doing?
Very good. Very good. Thanks for the call, sir.
Sure. Over the period of time from the early 70s and the late 60s, when there was a lot of problems in Boston, and they brought in busing to have the students integrated into the various communities, and they spent millions and millions of dollars on this busing stuff. And that was the idea in many of the other districts, forced busing And what happened in the end, Judge Garrity, okay, fine, it never proved anything. It was a total failure. It didn't increase anything. And even today, they're having trouble up there in Boston. All right, we need more teachers of color. I have worked with many teachers of color, and I have found them excellent teachers. Yeah. I was in different schools.
The question is, it's not if they're excellent, you've got a system that apparently doesn't pay well enough, or maybe doesn't offer enough benefits, whatever the case. How are you going to get them and keep them?
Yeah, well, that's true. It's always been part of contract negotiations. We got to get a pay raise. We need a pay raise. But many of the teachers don't realize if you take a 4-year contract, 2-year contract, and take a 1-year contract, no pay raise, but more meat in the contract, more things that can be done, like lower class sizes.
Yeah.
And another thing, because that money can be negotiated totally in the next contract negotiations.
I'm just going to interject here because while that sounds good, and I'm sure you're right to a certain extent, when somebody else is dangling a carrot in another district that already has a small class size, bye-bye. Right. Good idea, but bye-bye.
Right. And what I'm hoping is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
What I was going to say again, too, is when I graduated from college, all right, my student teaching year in my senior year, I was assigned to a school. I went to school out in the Southwest. I was assigned to a nice school in, shall we say, a plush area, okay? Principal came up to me the first day that I had an interview with her. She said, have you ever worked with colored students? And I said, excuse me? And she said it again. And I said, of course. I played ball with them. I interacted with them. We hung around up there at the Orchid Diner many a times after high school and in the weekends. And there was no problem. Well, when the school year started, I was assigned a 6th grade supervising teacher, and I helped the teacher with the students. Well, the colored students, shall we say, came in, and their integration, it was the first time of integration. Many of these young people were way, way behind. And I worked with them and helped them, and hopefully they improved in the short time I was there. Well, at the end of the session of my shall we say, student teaching, the principal said, boy, at the end of the year when you graduate, come and see me and you'll have a job right here in this building. And I said, fine. But I got a job here in New Bedford, and I had the opportunity to choose between 3 schools, the Knowlton, Condon, Donaghy. I chose the Donaghy school because it was in an area where I could get extra. It was known as kind of a tough area. My kids were not tough.
All right.
I had some good kids. A lot of them were good.
I appreciate it. I'm just going to go on because we got others. But I appreciate it. 508-996. No. I got it. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. He had a good story, Ross.
Yeah, he said a couple things.
It comes back to, we're trying to coax people into doing and being and what they need to learn and spending more and more money. The teachers don't get enough of that money, so they're packing their bags and they're going somewhere else.
Yeah, and that is an inherent problem. And then there are some things systemically like that we have to look at in our own school. So the conversation started about the segregation in New Bedford, and I don't think that that's the case. I think that's just there's way better words that describe the situations that we're trying to work on the best that we can. than the word segregation. How do we hold on to teachers of color? And again, I don't want to overemphasize that. It is important that
the story did. It's not you. The story emphasized that you need more and you need to retain them.
And we do. How do we go about that? Again, there are some things systemically that we can just make more appealing. We have to continually work on. And again, this goes across the board. But in terms of retaining, we want to make sure that the environments are welcoming. We want to make sure that the schools are a welcoming place where people feel invested and connected. There is a such thing as prejudice. There is such thing as bigotry. There are such thing as people looking down on people who speak a different language. That is a reality. You know what I'm saying? So we want to make sure that our leadership is inviting and is aggressive in searching for them, identifying them, and maintaining them. I mean, that is kind of up to our buildings the best we can, and retaining them. And that goes to the culture that we're shaping in our buildings. And I think the superintendent is doing a good job with that. I think you've seen a massive amount of teachers leave, not with the past administrator, but the administrator before that. And when you have masses of teachers leaving, there's going to be a high number of people of color, which are harder to get into the system right now. You know what I'm saying? So that impacted things tremendously. How do we make sure that our schools are welcoming, supportive of all their teachers? You know, and nobody's. I'm not saying there's a special treatment or anything like that.
So if I'm thinking along the lines that I need teachers of color, where am I looking for the teachers of color?
I'm going to go right back to, and I don't know if there should be something put in place, but in the days when I graduated, I feel like I'm becoming an old man, Brian. The administrators would watch. There was a good amount of young people of color who came back to the city and invested in it because we had people who were modeling for us, who were investing in us. You know what I'm saying?
I guess that would certainly be a way. What about going to historically black, and there are a few historically Native American and what's the other one I'm trying to think of? Hispanic schools.
But Brian, let me say this too, right? You want to have people who are connected to the community because we've also brought in outsiders, people of color, right? We brought them in and put them in buildings just because they're people of color. And they had no understanding of the community, no understanding of the history, or no understanding of the culture of that building, even though they were a person of color. We want to get the right people in. You know what I'm saying? I've always had a thing with bringing outsiders in. I got to get better at that, Brian. It's my own little prejudice.
I get it.
I'm a Bedford guy.
I would say former city councilor Dana Ribeiro would be a classic example of someone that I'm talking about. A Howard University graduate, grew up in the backyard. There are plenty of kids that go that leave here to go to historically black colleges and universities. Pluck from there.
We can aggressively recruit them, and they have a unique connection with the students and the families because they're homegrown. So we do want to make sure our staff is diverse. That's imperative. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we don't just want to put people of color in.
I hear you.
People of color in, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But there are ways. And again, I'm a living testimony of Dana Ribeiro. You know what I'm saying? You want to have teachers. And again, the whole philosophy of education was different back then. You know what I'm saying? Because my teachers all came from like the civil rights movement. You know what I'm saying? And then we grew up with that. So there was a whole paradigm. There was a whole worldview of like, we got to keep on building schools. We got to pass the baton on. You know what I'm saying? There's kind of been a break in that. And I think it's important that for those of us who are in there, that we're, trying to work with our young people. What's wrong with coming back to New Bedford? What's wrong with giving back to the place that brought you, But we have to have those conversations. I don't think every single answer is a policy. I think it's interaction. I think it's common sense, creativity, and I think it's making sure we're not handcuffed to do some of these things. But I'm going to go right back to it. And
I would love to let you do it. I'm just looking at the time. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds to quickly wrap up. 30.
All right. So basically, Brian, first of all, thank you for having me on. Just to recap, New Bedford Public Schools, in terms of that article, our issues and our focus should be more on what are we doing to make sure that what's going on in the buildings is correct, making sure that we have the right leadership, making sure that we have family involvement, making sure that our teachers are meeting the kids at where they're at, and making sure that the cultures within the building reflects that particular community and creates open dialogue and opportunity for students to interact and get to know one another. That's where all our effort should be. It shouldn't, using the word segregation, and I appreciate the article, I understand some of the intent. I think it can be a bit misconstruing to divert what are the real issues for some other agenda that comes at the state level.
Sounds good. Ross?
All right, Brian, thanks for having me on, Brian.
Before I say goodbye, I believe in the brotherhood of all men, but I don't believe in wasting brotherhood on anyone who doesn't want to practice it with me. Brotherhood is a two-way street.
Yes. You going to give the answer?
Malcolm X.
I'll Google it. Malcolm X. And I should have known that.
Kind of saved it for you, yeah. But that's okay.
Now I'm embarrassed. I should have known that.
Oh, that's all right, man.
Brian,
hey, got to let you go.
Thanks for having me on.
No problem.
Pleasure, okay?
Ross Grace Jr., New Bedford School Committee, joining us on the program today. How true, how true. Thanks to Ross Grace Jr. for joining us on the program today. Ken Pittman is